So good afternoon and welcome to our webinar session today where we're going to take a closer look at Creo Illustrate. And one of the things that the purpose of seeing this is because Creo Illustrate is a CAD neutral solution. Even though it's part of the Creo suite, it works with any CAD system and it allows you to create 3D work instructions, which are a lot better than using a 2D instruction. So this will help give your team better instructions on how for assembly. It can be used for your customers, however you see fit. This is a tremendous tool. It's something that I think is really overlooked by a lot of companies and has a lot of value. So my name is Rob Romanowski, and I'm your host today, as I am every Thursday for our Creo webinar series. And we have Paul Dye, who is a solutions consultant and applications engineer with PTC from the VCOE. And Paul is going to give us a brief presentation today and give us a demo of Creo Illustrate. If you have any questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A section or the chat box, and we'll answer them at the end, or if we can, we'll answer them as we go along. So Paul, without further ado, take it away. Hope everybody's got something to drink to kind of relax and enjoy this time together. It's all yours, Paul.
All right, perfect. And thank you, Rob, for having me on. And thank everybody for jumping on. And just to confirm, Rob, you can hear me all right, see my screen?
I hear you loud and clear, and I see your screen.
Cool. All right, yeah. So happy to be on talking today about Creo Illustrate. Really great tool. Use it for a bunch of different things. And like Rob mentioned, it's not just for Creo users, right? We have tons of people working out in the industry that don't use any Creo parametric, but get a lot of great use out of Creo Illustrate. So I'll be able to go and explain all that. I'll be able to go through and walk you through so you can see what that looks like in the context of Illustrate, go through and see a bunch of different capabilities. But to start, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give a general overview rundown of how Creo Illustrate works. First thing I like to do whenever we start to get into this is talk to some of the challenges that this looks to address. So looking at technical illustrations in general, they're very important for first and foremost communicating information about products, parts, services, essentially throughout the organization. You need clear documentation. Oftentimes you need it in different formats, different styles as well, right? So one of the big problems is that typically it's a pretty slow and tedious process to manually create those illustrations. And with that process being very slow, it's rare that you're ever working with the most up-to-date information in those manuals, right? Sometimes you have companies that have a lot of these rich, accurate CAD models, which is a lot of great information that we're able to use. But the problem is your illustrators that are creating the documentation are oftentimes not the ones that work with the CAD. They don't know it, or even if they do work with the CAD, it probably doesn't give you the tools that really an illustrator needs to do that work, right? What that sometimes leads to is your engineers and your designers being the ones that actually create the technical publication content. And that's not really what we want to be doing here, right? We're really using the wrong tool to do that. Those designers should be designing parts and assemblies in CAD, not building out the illustrations to be used in a manual, for example. And it also tends to be a very serial process where you can't even start to build out an illustration until the design process is complete, right? So all the time that could be spent working on illustrations and documentation, you end up just waiting around, right? And one of the big reasons for that serial process is because if you have any design changes, well, we have to go through and make manual updates for it, right? That's the way that the world works nowadays. You have your parts and models are always in a constant flux, always being changed and updated. So we have to be able to account for that. Or even worse, you have a model or an assembly or a product that just gets changed and updated, but the manual doesn't. Well, that's going to be a lot of cause for concern, grief for customers, users, something that we definitely need to be able to avoid. So we have a solution to all these different challenges with what we have in our tool, Creo Illustrate. So at a high level, this is an application designed to create detailed illustrations directly from our 3D CAD data. So I'm going to be using all that data, but I don't need to work with the actual CAD data itself. It's really built out for the non-CAD user to utilize. It's purely an illustration tool to give the illustrator the tools that you need to work with, the ones that you actually care about. And one of the things that we mentioned at the start of the presentation today is the fact that Illustrate doesn't care where the CAD data came from. It could be from Creo, or it could be a product view zip file, step file, could be SolidWorks, CATIA, doesn't matter, right? We're just able to bring it in, view it up graphically, and do our illustrations on it. And the results that you're going to get from this is very rich 2D and 3D technical illustrations. And it's not all just lines and arcs. We can actually import the full bill of material structure, full control over the graphics. We can translate pieces, move things around, rotate components. It's very easy to control all that from the bill of materials or just right from the visual window. It's also very easy to go through and build out things like callouts, something that you could go through and manually define, something that you could have Illustrate build out for you. It really understands all the different components, the subassemblies. So very quick, very easily get to things like exploded views that contain all those different callouts. And we also have an extendable library for different symbols and graphics that you might want to be using, things like hands, tools, arrows that you might want to utilize, something that we have a lot available out of the box, but it's also completely extendable, right? If there's any symbols or graphics that you want to use or that you have saved off in the library, feel free to add those in as well. And also a complete set of extensive graphical techniques for building out all the different steps in the animations, things like thick and thin lines for changing how certain parts of the model are rendered. You can do different cross-section views, all these things that are going to be important to an illustrator that maybe the CAD designer doesn't care about thick and thin lines, but if you're building these out to be put on paper in a manual or in a PDF, let's go ahead and give you the ability to create what's going to look best there. And with this, we also have the idea of working with animations. So you can do a whole sort of different animation steps to display a process. You can have an assembly show how everything goes together or how it gets taken apart. Put all those steps in, show how you would need to use the different tools and what that would look like for our front end users. And one thing here to mention as well is that Creo Illustrate can be fully integrated in with PTC's PLM and service systems. So I can keep all that information over in Windchill. You could get data from Windchill if you'd like to. Everything can really be tied together there. So you can really control that process and make sure that everything is going to be associative. And one thing to mention here too is the fact that once you're ready to publish an illustration, you have a lot of different options for publishing, all from that single illustration. So you could save off the 3D, 2D vector, 2D raster, image files, product view files. It's however you might want to be using this downstream. All right, now with this, I can go ahead and take us over into the context of Creo Illustrate. So we can go ahead and see what some of this looks like right over there. And again, if you have any questions or anything that you need me to elaborate more on, feel free to just drop that right in the chat and we can definitely get to that. All right, so here we are in our standard user interface that you might be, if you've worked in Creo, for example, or even just any other CAD tool, the general layout might look pretty similar. But here in Illustrate, we have our figures over here on the left-hand side. Figures could be a multitude of things, 3D models, animations, 2D drawings. You can set them up all differently for different use cases. You also have our service bill of materials here as well. Essentially like the model tree where you have your assemblies, parts all laid out. Here, again, one thing to mention is fully integrated 3D tool for bringing in this type of 3D source material here and creating our illustrations from that material. So one thing to note here is that with these models, you can take them, you can assemble things, you can move parts around if you'd like to, you can transform or rotate them here. On top of that, if you wanted to, you could hide or show anything that you might want to focus on. If you only wanted to see a particular subsection in this assembly here, feel free to hide anything that might not be important. One thing to mention here too is that you have the ability to change all the different rendering modes of the assembly. So here we could go ahead and look at this with shaded with edges. So still have that rich model with all the colors, but highlighting up on some of those hard edges. Or if it's going to be going into a service manual, for example, you can go ahead and still have all those edges show up nicely, but in more of a black and white mode. Also, the creation of exploded lines is very straightforward. It's because all the different parts of the model know exactly where their home locations are. So the fact that it's coming from that model makes it very quick, very easy to go through and change this type of things up. If you wanted to restore the location of any of those parts, that's also just a click away, right? So if you wanted to take that and restore it, it would go right to its home location. Same thing if you wanted to restore everything to that service bill of materials home location, you could do that as well. All right. So going from here, we can touch on some other great capabilities that we have here. First and foremost, I want to go through and show our symbol feature here for bringing in different things into my figure. So one thing to note is that we have some available out of the box here, like we have a hammer that we could bring in to show how that might be used for a particular step. You could also have some basic things like signs, different figures, and with each of those, again, if you wanted to bring in your own, you'd be able to add to that as well. So, and for example, here we could show that a certain part might be flammable, or you might need to have a certain caution there. And very quickly here, we can touch on some of the just general architecture of the program, how some of these program or project files work. Here you have all the different information that you might need to work with here. You have all the different sources that we're pulling in from. So we have a CAD file, we have a PVZ, a couple different things there that we can take a look at. And one thing to note for the project files, these are all stored as 3 CDI files. It contains all the source material, a lot of information there. And one thing that, again, with each of these, they're all going to be linked in back with that original file. And that's really powerful for us, right? Because again, if you have something get updated or you get sent a new version of that, that source is able to be updated right from within the illustration. And you don't have to go through and recreate every time that there's a small or even a large change. And we have some of the properties associated with that as well. So always able to go through and reference that at any point. All right. So here we also have our different figures. These could be each considered their own illustration. Again, could be just a 2D drawing of the part or a 3D representation of the entire assembly. It's completely up to you. All right, from here we can go ahead and look at some different things here in our figures, right? This one here has a phantom part mode on that outside ski track, so it gives us a nice view throughout that track. You can even select on parts right through that phantom mode, but still have it in relation to the track on the outside. In this particular figure, we also have a 2D drawing that's been built off of that 3D parent. Illustrator has some very strong two-dimensional long line drawing modes that'll be able to project our 3D model into a 2D vector projection. So in this one here, I have hidden lines removed, makes it very nice for me to work with the model. I have the ability to go through and clean up any of those lines, delete things that I don't like, or add things in as I see fit. One of the other great things about this 2D drawing mode is that it's fully linked to the 3D parent as well. So it means that if I come back into the assembly here and take one of these wheels and show it in more of a exploded or removed state, or just make whatever changes that I might need to, what's going to happen is that the 2D drawing is now going to say that it's out of date. So what it'll do is re-render itself based on that new configuration from the parent. So just a very good way to make sure that you're getting all that info, making sure that everything stays consistent. So back here on the drawing, you can see now that the view has been updated. So it looks pretty good. And now moving on from here, we can see that Illustrate also supports formatting illustrations for particular page sizes. So that's the base for what we have here. We have a couple different detailed views. And one of the nice things with this is that you can see we have these inset views. They're all referencing the same parts from within the assembly here. So if you were to select on a part 1 view, you'd get a couple other perspectives in those other views. So it makes it very clear where all those parts are located. Another functionality that we have here is the fact that the annotations tied to the model are actually parametric, or they're all based off of certain attributes. It means that for any of these parts, if you select on something, you can see all the associated attributes with that particular part. Could be metadata from the part itself, could be attributes from Windchill, things like a part name or category or certain values. In this case here, we have the native name, we have a part name, and also the feature ID coming off of that assembly.
Hey, Paul, a question that came in. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, someone wants to know if this can be used with SOLIDWORKS CAD files and also with neutral files like a step or an IGES file.
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is really CAD agnostic, right? If you had your assembly files or even just your normal part files or drawings coming over from SolidWorks, you'd be able to bring those in natively and work with them in the same way that we're doing here. Or even if you just had a step or an IGES file, for example, that works just as fine. And you can actually have combinations of those as well. So it doesn't have to be you're all working within the same file type. You could essentially just work with any combination of those as well.
Good stuff. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, no, good question. Right, so this is a good kind of switching over point. We can go ahead and look at our ability to build out some animations and sequences. So animations in general, really powerful. You can really bring your models to life. Your sequence is also really good for breaking up those animations into step-by-step procedures. And we could use them in a ton of different ways. So what we have here in this sequence, you see our first step is going to highlight and remove a washer or nut. And from there, our second step gives you a little bit more information on the spring, gives you a warning attached to that spring. So steps can be used anywhere from a series of different images to use in an instruction manual. We can even use it all the way up to full augmented reality experiences that we support with PTC as well. But I can also go through and show a couple things here as well. We can take a look at our step editor here. You can manage all the different steps in your procedure, all the different effects and the timing for each of those steps. So if we go ahead and open up one of the steps here, you can see you have all the different camera tracks that make up that animation. You can see in this case here, it's going to flash, it's going to expand out, and then finally fade away. Same thing here for step 2 in the process. So if we change the different steps here, you can see all the keyframe editors, I'll update all the effects used there. So it means that if you were to look at this, you could change the color of the springs, see all that there. All right, we can go ahead and also show what it looks like to create a new step here. So what I want to do now is have the caution sign fade out, and we want to highlight on the next nut that needs to be removed. And as you can see, it's very easy to go through and access any of those effects. You essentially just select whatever you want right up from the top, and Illustrate makes it very straightforward to build out. And you can see here that this is really able to bring all these models to life, right? It's not just a bunch of words or maybe a picture on a page. It's rich, it's meaningful content, leaves a lot less up to the imagination, and really does a great job of showing each of the steps there. Final view that we have here is a little bit more of a traditional exploded view, shows all the different parts there in that subassembly. This is more of a bill of materials view. Illustrate has the capability of attaching our different annotations to all those parts, something that you could consume in a parts catalog viewer, for example, or if you want to select on all those parts, you can see all the attributes associated with it as well. All right. Now, that's pretty much it for the figures that we have in this project. What I want to also go through now and show is some of the different options that we have whenever it's time to publish out the illustrations to be used over in whatever application has been designed for. So Illustrate supports three-dimensional outputs, as a few different two-dimensional vector outputs, 2D raster, also video for the animations and the sequences that we were working with. And when we want to publish, we can just simply select what figures that we want to publish out to each format. So for example, here we can go through and even look at it deeper, right? With each of these different publishers, for example, we have the 2D raster, we have complete control over how we're going to generate that file. So depending on the type of content that you're working with, you can change different things like the height, the width, the aspect ratio. You're doing that for an image, but you also have some things like for 2D illustrations, you have options for hidden line removal. It's all being done just to make sure that the end product that you're ultimately getting is exactly what you want before you go ahead and share that off downstream. All right, so that covers basically everything that I wanted to show here from within the context of Illustrate, and really a ton of benefits and a ton of really good value that we get from working with Illustrate. It starts by having all those illustrations linked to the 3D source that it's created from, makes it faster for me to begin, build out all those different illustrations, and even that much faster to go through and make updates to the illustration whenever there might be changes to those CAD files. I can also do this process completely independent from the original engineering sources that we started with. So even though I'm getting some of those files from Creo or from a third-party source, it doesn't really matter, right? I can work completely in my own environment and it's completely pain-free from my end. It's really cutting back a lot of the duplicate work that we're doing. We don't need to build out a new illustration whenever our CAD designer needs to make changes, and really allows us to maximize the use of our illustrations, whatever documentation that we're building out, and include more pictures, more detail, and at the same time just increasing the overall accuracy with that. And from a business perspective, it's doing a lot, right? First and foremost, accelerating time to market. We don't have to wait to ship out a product because we're waiting on a service manual to be completed. None of that, right? We have all the illustrations, all the documentation done more concurrently, and that's going to help at the end of the day make our customers, our users, a lot happier, right? There's nothing worse than having all the manuals or instructions that are incomplete, incorrect, outdated. We want everything to be accurate and at the end of the day, more graphically clear. All right, so that really covers everything that I wanted to touch on from Illustrate. Again, one thing I want to really highlight on is the fact that even if you're not working with Creo, this is still something that is very strong for anyone that's working over in the illustration side of things, anyone that's building out service documentation, and it'd be helpful for any of those different areas. All right, and I can pass it back over to you, Robin, and see if there's any questions or anything that we wanted to expand upon.
Absolutely. So there's another question that came in. Applying to the animated output, can the output be exported to a cloud-based or web-based site so it can be accessed by customers who don't have Creo Illustrator?
Sure. I mean, it's essentially just up to whatever cloud-based source that you want to host it on, right? You'd essentially just take that animation file and as long as the web or the cloud-based solution that you're working with is able to play that up, then yeah, sure, that would definitely be something you could do.
Then somebody does not need, because it's CAD neutral, they wouldn't need a Creo viewer or a CAD viewer. They would just be able to view it.
Exactly. So for example, if you really wanted to, we have a Creo viewer, like Creo View, for example, that could go through and allow someone to play up those animations or just see those different files. But also, like you're saying too, if you need to publish this out to different viewers, then that's also no problem.
Excellent. Cool. So if you have any other questions or want some more detail, or if you want a more detailed conversation about what you need to accomplish, or if you want to see a more detailed demo of Creo Illustrate, you can reply to the email that you received regarding this webinar. Those replies come directly to me, or you can email us at info, I-N-F-O, real simple, at 3hti.com. So that's going to conclude our webinar for today. And that's it. So 24 minutes. I was hoping to be a little shorter, but you know what, Paul? I think we did good anyway. Thanks everyone for being on. Thanks, Paul, for your help, and have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.